Jake's quiet house felt like a tomb after his wife's death. Desperate to help his grieving son, he found Elena, a Ukrainian widow with 7 children seeking security. When they arrived at his door, 2 broken families discovered that sometimes the most unexpected love creates the most beautiful families. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. Jake Morrison stood at his kitchen window, watching the empty swing set in his backyard sway in the morning breeze. It had been 3 years since his wife Sarah died in a car accident, leaving him to raise their 5-year-old son Tommy alone. The house that once echoed with laughter now felt like a tomb, filled only with the sound of his own footsteps and Tommy's quiet voice asking when mommy was coming home. At 32, Jake had given up on the idea of love. His focus was entirely on Tommy, who had grown withdrawn and sad since losing his mother. The boy barely spoke at school, spent hours staring out windows and cried himself to sleep most nights. Jake's heart broke watching his son struggle, but he didn't know how to fix it. That's when his sister Emily suggested something that seemed crazy at the time. "Jake, you need help," she said during one of her visits. "Tommy needs a mother figure and you need a partner. Have you considered, I don't know, looking into international marriage agencies?" Jake had laughed bitterly. "A mail-order bride? This isn't the 1800s. "It's not like that anymore," Emily insisted. "These are real women looking for real relationships. Many of them are single mothers themselves, looking for stability and love. Maybe someone who understands loss, who has children of her own." The idea haunted Jake for weeks. Finally, in a moment of desperation after finding Tommy crying in his closet, clutching a photo of Sarah, Jake found himself browsing international marriage websites. That's where he met Elena. Elena Petrov was 30 years old, living in a small town in Ukraine with her 7 children. Her husband had died in an industrial accident 2 years earlier, leaving her struggling to feed and care for her kids alone. Her profile was simple and honest. She wasn't looking for romance or adventure. She needed security for her children and was willing to marry a kind man who would accept her large family. Jake stared at her photo for hours. She had warm brown eyes and a tired but genuine smile. In the picture, she was surrounded by children of various ages, all looking at the camera with hope and uncertainty. Something about her face reminded him of Sarah, not physically, but the way she looked at her children with such fierce love. They exchanged letters for 3 months. Elena's English was broken but heartfelt. She wrote about her children: Maria, 15 and responsible beyond her years; twins Ivan and Igor, 13 and always getting into trouble; Katya, 11 and obsessed with books; little Dmitry, 9 and afraid of everything; baby Anya, just 2 years old and barely remembering her father; and Petro, the middle child at 7 who had stopped speaking after his father's death. Jake wrote about Tommy, about Sarah, about the loneliness that filled their big house. Elena wrote back with understanding that pierced his heart. She knew exactly what it felt like to watch your child suffer and feel helpless to fix it. Their correspondence grew deeper. Elena wasn't looking for a fairy tale. She was looking for partnership, stability, and someone who would love her children as his own. Jake found himself falling for her honesty, her strength, and the way she described tucking 7 children into bed each night with stories and songs despite having no money for proper food. After 6 months of letters, phone calls, and video chats, Jake made the decision that would change everything. He would bring Elena and her children to America. They would marry not for love initially but for the chance to build something real together. The paperwork was a nightmare. Immigration lawyers, background checks, medical exams, and endless forms. But finally, after 8 months of bureaucratic hell, Jake stood in the arrivals area of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, holding a sign with Elena's name. His hands were shaking. Tommy stood beside him, clutching his father's free hand. They had talked about this moment for weeks, but Jake still wasn't sure they were ready for their quiet life to be turned upside down by 8 new people. Then he saw them. Elena emerged from the gate looking exhausted and overwhelmed, carrying 2-year-old Anya while trying to keep track of 6 other children. The teenagers, Maria and the twins, looked sullen and scared. Katya clutched a worn book to her chest. Little Dmitry hid behind his mother's skirt. And Petro, silent Petro, walked slightly apart from the group, his face blank. Jake's first thought was, "What have I done?" His second thought was, they look terrified. Elena spotted him and their eyes met across the crowded terminal. For a moment, both of them looked like they wanted to run. This was insane. They barely knew each other. He was about to become responsible for 7 children he'd never met. She was trusting her family's future to a man she'd only seen on a computer screen. But then little Anya saw Tommy and pointed, babbling something in Ukrainian. Tommy, who hadn't shown interest in anything in months, stepped forward and waved shyly at the toddler. Elena smiled, a real smile this time, not the nervous one from her photos. "Jake?" she said as they approached, her accent thick with emotion. "Elena." He wasn't sure if he should shake her hand or hug her, so he did neither. "Welcome to America." The drive home was awkward and chaotic. The van Jake had borrowed from his brother-in-law was packed with 8 people, luggage, and the sound of children speaking rapid Ukrainian. Tommy sat pressed against the window, staring at his new siblings with wide eyes. Elena sat in the front passenger seat, baby Anya asleep in her arms, looking out at the American landscape with wonder and fear. "Is beautiful," she said quietly, pointing at the suburban houses they passed. "Wait until you see our house," Jake replied, then immediately worried it would sound like bragging. Elena's letters had described their tiny apartment in Ukraine, where all 8 of them shared 2 rooms. When they pulled into Jake's driveway, the children spilled out of the van and stood in the front yard, staring at the 2-story house with its big windows and green lawn. It wasn't a mansion, but Jake suddenly saw it through their eyes, spacious and safe with a swing set in the backyard and bedrooms for everyone. "This is ours?" Maria asked in careful English, speaking for the first time since the airport. "This is home," Jake said simply. The first few weeks were chaos. Jake had tried to prepare, buying bunk beds and enrolling the school-age children in classes, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of suddenly having 8 children in his house. The twins, Ivan and Igor, spoke no English but had apparently decided that American plumbing was the most fascinating thing they'd ever encountered. Jake came home from work to find them taking apart the bathroom sink, to see how it worked. Katia refused to leave the house without her book and spent hours in the corner reading, occasionally looking up to watch this strange new family with calculating eyes. Little Dmitri was afraid of everything: the garbage disposal, the neighbor's dog, the sound the heater made at night. He followed Elena everywhere, clinging to her skirt and jumping at sudden noises. Baby Anya was the easiest, toddling around the house and treating every new discovery like a grand adventure. Petro, the silent one, was the most heartbreaking. He would stand in doorways watching the chaos, never participating, never speaking. Elena had warned Jake that Petro hadn't said a word since his father's death, but seeing the boy's hollow eyes was different than reading about it. And Tommy, Jake's own son, seemed overwhelmed by suddenly having so many siblings. He'd gone from being an only child in a quiet house to one of 8 children in constant motion. Elena tried to manage it all while learning English, navigating American customs, and dealing with her own grief and displacement. Jake would come home from work to find her in the kitchen, surrounded by children doing homework, baby Anya on her hip, stirring 3 different pots while helping Katia with math problems. "Is too much," she said to Jake one evening after a particularly difficult day. Dmitri had had a meltdown at his new school, the twins had been sent to the principal's office for conducting experiments with the cafeteria food, and Tommy had locked himself in his room, refusing to come out. Jake sat down at the kitchen table, exhausted. "Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe this was a mistake." Elena looked at him with those warm brown eyes that had first captured his attention. "You regret?" The question hung in the air between them. Did he regret it? His quiet, controlled life had been turned upside down. His house was in constant chaos. He was responsible for children he barely knew, spending money he didn't have, and dealing with problems he'd never imagined. But then Anya toddled over and climbed into his lap, babbling contentedly in her mix of Ukrainian and baby talk. And he remembered the sound of laughter that had returned to his house. Real laughter, from multiple children, filling the empty spaces that had echoed with loneliness for 3 years. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. But I think we're all struggling to figure out how to be a family." Elena nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "In Ukraine we have saying, the tree that bends in the storm does not break. We bend now but we not break." That night, Jake made a decision. He called a family meeting, something he'd never done with just him and Tommy, but which seemed necessary now with 8 children. They gathered in the living room, the older children translating for the younger ones. Jake looked at the faces around him, some curious, some suspicious, some scared. "I know this is hard for everyone," he began. "We're all trying to figure out how to be a family. Tommy's trying to learn how to be a big brother to 7 new siblings. You're all trying to adjust to a new country, a new language, a new father. Elena and I are trying to learn how to parent 8 children together." Maria translated for the younger children, her voice serious and grown up. "But here's what I want you to know," Jake continued. "This isn't temporary. You're not guests here. This is your home and I'm your dad now. That means when you're in trouble, I'm here. When you're scared, I'm here. When you need help with homework or have a bad dream or just need someone to listen, I'm here. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she translated, and Jake saw something shift in the children's faces. I also want you to know that it's okay to miss your father, Jake said, looking directly at Petro. He was your dad first, and no one expects you to forget him or stop loving him. But maybe there's room in your hearts for two dads. That night, as Jake was tucking Tommy into bed, his son asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. Dad, do you love Elena? Jake paused, considering how to answer honestly. I care about her very much and I'm learning to love her. But mostly I love our family, all of it. I love having brothers and sisters for you. I love hearing the house full of voices. Do you like having siblings? Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes it's scary. There are so many of them and they're all so different. But today Ivan showed me how to make a paper airplane that actually flies really far. And Katia let me look at her book. It has pictures of dragons. And Petro? He's sad like I was when Mom died. Maybe we can be sad together sometimes and happy together sometimes too. Jake kissed his son's forehead, feeling something settle in his chest. Maybe they could make this work. The breakthrough came 6 weeks later in the most unexpected way. Jake was in the garage trying to fix Tommy's broken bicycle, when he heard screaming from the backyard. He ran outside to find Dimitri at the bottom of the old oak tree, crying and holding his arm. The boy had been trying to climb up to retrieve a ball and had fallen. As Jake knelt beside Dimitri, checking for broken bones, he became aware of voices around him. Maria was talking rapidly in Ukrainian, trying to calm her little brother. The twins were arguing about whose fault it was. Katia was crying. Anya was wailing in sympathy. Tommy was running to get Elena. And then, cutting through all the chaos, came a small, clear voice. Is he okay? Everyone went silent. Petro stood a few feet away, his face full of concern, his first words in over 2 years hanging in the air. Elena appeared at Jake's shoulder, took one look at Petro and burst into tears. She dropped to her knees and pulled her silent son into her arms, babbling in Ukrainian through her sobs. Dimitri's arm wasn't broken, just scratched and bruised. But something much more important had healed that day. That evening, as Elena was putting Anya to bed, she found Jake sitting on the front porch steps, watching the older children play basketball in the driveway while Tommy and Petro sat together on the swing set, actually talking quietly to each other. You know, Elena said, sitting down beside him, when I first write to you, I think I need husband for security. For papers, for safety, for children's future. Jake nodded. I thought I needed a wife to help with Tommy. Someone to cook and clean and be a mother. We were both wrong, Elena said softly. Were we? She leaned against his shoulder and Jake felt the rightness of it, not passionate or desperate but warm and solid and real. We needed family. We needed this. She gestured toward their children. 8 children who belong together. 2 adults who choose to love them all. Jake put his arm around her, watching as Maria helped Dimitri with his homework while the twins made Katia laugh. Tommy was pushing Petro on the swing, both boys actually smiling. Elena? Yes. Will you marry me? I mean really marry me. Not for papers or security or help with the children. But because I love you and I love our family, and I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you. Elena pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining. You love me? I love your strength. I love how you never give up on your children. I love how you make our house feel like a home. I love how you've taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about choosing to show up for each other every single day. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I marry you. For real this time. They were married 6 months later in Jake's backyard, surrounded by their 8 children and a few close friends. Elena wore a simple white dress that Maria had helped her pick out, and Jake wore his best suit with a tie that the twins had given him, one covered in tiny basketballs because they decided their new dad needed to look more fun. Tommy was the ring bearer, walking solemnly down the aisle with Anya toddling beside him as flower girl, throwing petals everywhere except where they were supposed to go. Maria stood as Elena's maid of honor, translating the vows for the younger children. Petro, who had blossomed into a chatty 7-year-old, whispered commentary throughout the ceremony that had everyone trying not to laugh. But the moment that made Jake's eyes fill with tears was when the officiant asked if anyone had anything to say before they were pronounced husband and wife. Dimitri, who was still afraid of many things but had grown brave enough to speak up when it mattered, raised his small hand. I have something, he said in his careful English. The officiant smiled. Go ahead, son. Dmitri looked at Jake with serious eyes. Thank you for being our dad. Thank you for making us a family. One by one the other children spoke up. Maria thanked Jake for giving them a safe home. The twins thanked him for letting them do science experiments in the garage. Katya thanked him for buying her an entire bookshelf of new books. Petro thanked him for teaching him to ride a bike. Anya just clapped and shouted, "Dada," which made everyone laugh. And Tommy, Jake's first son, stood up and said, "Thank you for giving me the best brothers and sisters in the world. And thank you, Elena, for being the best mom ever." There wasn't a dry eye in the backyard. 2 years later, Jake stood in the same spot where he'd once watched an empty swing set, but now the backyard was full of life. Maria was teaching Anya to braid dandelions into crowns. The twins were building an elaborate fort with Tommy and Petro. Katya was reading under the oak tree while Dmitri practiced his spelling words beside her. Elena appeared beside him, her hand finding his automatically. She was pregnant, their first child together, though they'd stopped thinking in terms of his, hers, and theirs long ago. They were all just family. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, following his gaze to their children. "I was thinking about that day at the airport," Jake said. "How terrified we both were. How impossible it all seemed. And now." Jake watched as Tommy picked up Anya and spun her around, both of them laughing. He saw Maria helping Dmitri with a word he couldn't pronounce. He saw the twins teaching Petro some elaborate game that involved a lot of running and shouting. He saw Katya looking up from her book to smile at the chaos around her. "Now I can't imagine any other life," he said. "You know what the crazy thing is? I went looking for a mail-order bride to help me with one child, and instead I found the family you never had," Elena finished softly. "The family we never had," Jake corrected, squeezing her hand. "All of us." That evening, as they did every night, Jake and Elena went from room to room, tucking in their children. 8 children in 4 bedrooms, each one loved and safe and home. In the room the twins shared, Igor whispered, "Papa Jake, will you tell us about when you first saw us at the airport?" In Katya and Anya's room, Katya asked, "Will you read us just one more chapter?" In Dmitri's room, the boy who had once been afraid of everything asked, "Will you check the closet for monsters?" And in the room Tommy and Petro shared, both boys called out, "Good night, Dad." "Good night, Mama Elena." As Jake and Elena finally made it to their own bedroom, exhausted but content, Elena smiled at her husband. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't answered my letter?" she asked. Jake thought about it seriously. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Maybe not the way we did, but families like ours, they're meant to be. Sometimes it just takes a little faith and a lot of love to bring them together." Elena curled up beside him, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Our children, all of them, they saved us, didn't they?" "We saved each other," Jake replied, kissing the top of her head. "That's what families do." Outside their window, the swing set creaked gently in the night breeze, but it was no longer empty. Tomorrow it would be full again with the sound of children's laughter, the sight of growing kids learning to be siblings, and the everyday magic of a family that chose to love each other completely. Jake Morrison had gone looking for help with one lonely child and found himself the father of 8. Elena Petrov had been searching for security and stability and found herself with a husband who loved her not despite her large family, but because of it. Together they had discovered something neither had dared to hope for. The family they never had, built not from perfection but from commitment, not from ease but from choice, and not from fairy tale romance but from the deep, abiding love that grows when people decide to show up for each other, day after day after day. In the end, it turned out that the best families aren't born, they're made, one day at a time, one choice at a time, by people brave enough to believe that love can multiply infinitely when you open your heart wide enough to let it.